Good day, grade 7s. Welcome to today's history lesson. We're still continuing with the transatlantic slave trade. It's today, the 24th of June. Before we carry on, I'm first going to pop up last week's two activities memorandums up on the board. Your teacher's welcome to stop here and mark. Just very important here for activity 2.5. Have a read through. If your answer is very similar to what I wrote on the board, then it's fine. If you're unsure about your answer, I would suggest maybe mark it wrong and rather add in my answer, or you can add on to your answer. But when in doubt, write it out. That's my rule of thumb. And if you are making errors, I really do hope you're engaging with your teacher to understand what you need to rectify when you are doing this activity. If you look at number 4, just very important, it's any two of the following. So there's 4 bullets, but you only have to choose 2 of those. Try not, if we ask you to give reasons, try not to put too many things into one sentence, less is more. So keep your sentences short and powerful. Then for activity 2.6 was very straightforward. Just very important for number 2, where you had to write, copy down the table. You'll see I simplified it very much for you. What I do want you to notice is the following, that even though it was triangular trade, what you give is what you get, hence the import and export, even though it's not a direct line that we were learned in previous years as well. So if you notice this trend, you'll see that everyone actually gets similar items. So I want you to see the pattern of how we go diagonally. So raw and raw goes there, manufactured goods and slaves, manufactured goods and slaves. I want you to see that pattern as well. That's also an easy way to study it if you write your continents and countries in that order. Right, then for today, we're going on with Unit 4, page 111 to 113. Just a few definitions that you need to go through. Your teacher can pause here and read through it with you. And then plantation slaves in the American South. So with the mass production refers to when very large quantities of products are manufactured. Plantations were huge farms in the southern states of America, so refer to Virginia, Louisiana, Georgia, and South and North Carolina. There were different kinds of slaves on the plantations. The most important slaves were cooks, home cleaners, nannies, washing women, and car drivers. Now, why did we have all these different ones? Slaves didn't have to work outside, so not all slaves worked physically on the plantation itself. So slave women were encouraged to have children so they could also be used as slaves. So remember, at the end of the day, and I'm sure this has been addressed in your class as well, you need to address the inhumanity of what's being dealt with here. And then the next bullets, the Misa or the master had personal slaves. Slaves were given new names by their owner. Most common reason being they either couldn't pronounce the slave's name, or just like you would, if you had to make that horrible comparison of saying, it's like when you buy a car and you'd give it a nickname or whatever. That's how these plantation owners viewed their slaves, and obviously the unethicalness with it. But in those years, that's unfortunately how times were. And just the injustice thereof as well. And then next point there, for sugarcane production in Georgia and the US, they imported African slaves for it. And the reason being because the slaves knew so much about sugarcane, and to grind rice of hand was hard work, so many people needed for this. Remember, if you always argue back, why did they need slaves? Because the work was labor intensive, and then they needed many people to do hard work. So it always comes back to that. If we go back to the human rights that were violated for slaves, so slaves had no freedom of movement or speech. They were forced to endure long hours of work. They were beaten if the caretaker thought they were working too slowly. They were treated like possessions, and they were not allowed to make any decisions of their own. Owners gave new names to slaves and branded their bodies. Remember, branding is like what we do to cattle. We basically burn the initial of the owner on the cattle, in this case on the slave. They were only allowed to be Christians and not their own religion now. And even though in South Africa we do have quite a large percentage of a population practicing Christianity, in Western Africa there were different religions as well. But the moment they moved across to North America to assist, they were predominantly owned by Christian owners. And in those states, Christianity was in the majority. So that in itself is also an injustice. Then carrying on, no drums allowed in case they send messages to organizing uprisings. So if you just think about how they limited the people and how they almost overstepped their place as well, by not even allowing them any recreation because they thought it would be used in the wrong way. And then women were encouraged to have children who could also then become slaves. And slave owners did not kill slaves because they paid for them. Right. Then the suffering of the slaves. So besides the whole human injustice that took place, there's some additional suffering as well. Your teacher can pause here and read through it with you. And then slave culture in songs and stories. So because of everything they can't do, the slaves had to find something to hold on to as a form of motivation and to get them through these tiresome days. So if we look here at churches, many slaves were converted to Christianity. The slaves sat on hard benches and listened to European preachers telling them to obey and work hard. They then organized their own secret services. They danced, sang, and preached about freedom and God helping them to overcome the hardships in their lives. At the end of the day, these people were so desperate, and this was basically their only coping mechanism before the revolt. And then carrying on, stories, animal stories, so they reflect values, hope, and fears, just like we know with fables and folk tales. I love many of the Bible stories like Daniel escaping from the lion's pit, etc. And they use stories to teach children the difference between right and wrong. So despite them almost being enforced through Christianity, that did value some of its attributes, especially those that were a-religious or agnostic and such. This gave them a chance then to adopt some sense of hope into their lives. Then very important, slave culture and song. To get away from the boredom of repetitive work, the slaves sang songs that became known as Negro spirituals. So that was the term used for the songs that were sang whilst the slaves were working on the plantations. These songs were based on Bible stories about hope, freedom, and better future. Songs were expressions of religious faith and of the slave struggle to survive the harsh conditions of their lives on the plantation. So there are a few examples of songs of value, hope, and fears. Right, so very important question that you have to have embedded in your head. Why was music so important to slaves? If I ever ask you that question and you're not too sure of how to word it, easiest way to do it is as such. It helped to divert, in other words, take their mind off, their attention from their depression, suffering, and lack of self-worth. So the music gave them a sense of hope. It gave them a sense of motivation. So that was their thing to hold on to, clutch to, because they were so limited of everything else. Right, then today we've got two activities, activity 2.7 followed by 2.8. At the top of a new page, I want you to write that heading, rule off, paste in, and complete. For activity 2.8, again, date again, that heading, rule off, paste in activity, and complete. I wish you guys all of the best and keep up with your hard work.